Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Comox Valley Project Watershed Society is an environmental non-for-profit stewardship organization that's been around for 20 years. Our mission has to deal with all of the watersheds of the Comox Valley, from Deep Bay all the way to the Oyster River. Our mission is pretty straightforward. We carry out public information, public education, and action, most specifically with respect to habitat restoration. For the last number of years, one of our focal points has been the Comox estuary. An estuary is a semi-enclosed body of water with monomer rivers that flow into it and with an open connection to the ocean. Estuaries serve as biodiversity corridors. Critters move from the ocean through this corridor, either through the water, along the shore, or in the airspace, to the rivers and creeks in the mountains, and then some of them come back down to the ocean. This is a map of the Comox estuary as Project Watershed defines it. It begins by the Condensatory Bridge right above the point where the Solom and the Puntledge River enter the short Courtney River, and the estuary empties into the ocean, or the Strait of Georgia, at Goose Spit and Gartley Point. Estuaries have been called nurseries of the ocean. Many organisms lay their eggs in estuaries, and many other organisms spend all or part of their life history in estuaries. The Comox estuary has been slowly declining for about 150 years. About 50% of the shoreline has been consumed by human activity and development. Two things happened in the middle part of the last century that had a dramatic and escalating effect on the decline of the estuary. The first was the establishment of the field sawmill in 1949, and with this sawmill in Courtney came log booming in the estuary and continual dredging, two activities that have a negative impact on the health of estuaries. The other factor that happened about the same time was that the height of the dam at Comox Lake was doubled in 1953, and water release from the dam began to wash out some of the salmon rearing areas along the Puntledge and its tributaries. Despite this fact, the estuary is still a wonder of nature. It is, without doubt, the most significant natural feature in the valley, at least in my opinion. It, along with the Comox Glacier, frames our world. We are ranked as a Class 1 estuary, and there are only 8 Class 1 estuaries in the province based on biodiversity. We're second only to the Fraser River estuary. Historically, people used to come to the Comox Valley to catch salmon. It was one of the huge attractions, and people came from all over the world. This next photograph is a photograph of a woman who's the aunt of Queen Jubilee medal winner Norma Morton, who is the historian for the Estuary Working Group. Her aunt, Mrs. McKenzie, a resident of Black Creek, on a given September afternoon in 1954, pulled in these two majestic Tyee salmon. First Nations have been on our estuary for at least 4,000 years and perhaps longer, according to archaeological evidence. And according to the work of community archaeologist Nancy Green and her husband David McGee, the Comox estuary has wood stake relics of an ancient fish trap system, larger than anything that's been reported in North America and perhaps in the world. Some of these fish traps are 100 feet across. And these fish traps work with the tide, and they are linked in systems. And Nancy and David believe that these systems provided almost an industrial level fisheries by the coastal First Nations people that lived in this area for virtually hundreds of years. There were 3 different villages along the Comox estuary, and certainly there was enough to feed those villages and villages north and south of the Comox Valley. One of the things that Project Watershed has been attempting to do since the 2008 and the Heart of the Watershed event was to put a value on the estuary to local residents, and we specifically targeted the politicians and the business people. We started what we called our Keeping a Living Community Awareness campaign. You might have seen our full-page ads in the paper. We run them over 6 months each year for the last 4 or 5 years. We hold events along the estuary. we carried out a sociological estuary resident survey, and where we interviewed over 100 people, 180 people that lived along the estuary, and got their opinions. And this survey is on our website. Real estate on the estuary, as we know, is worth a lot of money. If you have a home on the estuary or a view of the estuary, that's very valuable. We have been trying to impress upon our local politicians and business people that ecotourism and historical and archaeological tourism can be economically very important for the Comox Valley. But one of the things that I learned as a biologist in all of this was pretty striking. And that is, if you were to drive along the road between Comox and Courtney, along the Comox estuary, and were to drive through a similar distance in a first growth forest of conifers like we have at Cathedral Grove, would you be surprised to know that our estuary can be as much as 4 or 5 times more productive than even this mature first growth forest of large Douglas fir trees and cedar trees? This can be illustrated quite nicely in this chart, which compares vegetation systems in the northern hemisphere and their ability to remove the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is the first of the building blocks in photosynthesis. And as you can see, estuaries do it much better than anything else on the northern hemisphere. One of the questions that Project Watershed began to ask is, how can we use all this interesting information about our estuary to do something constructive with respect to our mission, which is habitat restoration, and to link it to the province of British Columbia's Climate Action Charter, which leads most of the governments in the Western Hemisphere for some action on climate change. The Climate Action Charter suggests that local municipalities and businesses should get their carbon footprint down to neutrality. And there are a number of ways to do that. And of course, the most logical way is just to stop using fossil fuels. But since most of us drove here tonight, we have to look for alternative sources, and we do look at things like solar energy, wind energy, perhaps biofuels. And one of the other things that's a little bit more controversial is the purchasing of offsets on the world offset market. Now, we all have heard about green carbon offsets or land-based carbon offsets. One can buy stands of timber, and if that stand of timber is left for 20 years or more, you can get offset credits. And the good news is it's fairly straightforward and easy to measure how much carbon dioxide is sequestered or put away by these stands of trees. The bad news is that trees can be subject to forest fire, they can be subject to heavy weather conditions, wind, they can be subject to pathogens, insects and fungi, and they can be subject to human intervention. Blue carbon, on the other hand, is carbon that is sequestered in marine environments or in estuaries. And the good news about blue carbon is that when it's put away indefinitely. It goes into the sediments of the estuary, it goes into the deep ocean sediments, it becomes part of the water column, and it's put away. And that's, as I say, is good news. The bad news is we don't have a way to measure that yet. And one of the things that we thought we could do at Project Watershed is develop a strategy to make these measurements and generate a protocol for a blue carbon offset. And we are in one of the world's most productive shellfish growing areas in Bain Sound and in the Comox estuary. And so it makes sense to pay attention to the role that calcium carbonate in the shell of mussels, clams, oysters, and other shellfish have in this carbon sink. If you put away 5 tons of mussels or clams, for every 5 tons of mussels or clams produced, 1 ton of carbon dioxide is permanently put away. These are the 2 vegetation systems that you find in estuaries that can be as much as 5 times more productive at sequestering carbon from the atmosphere than even mature rine forests. The upper left photograph is a photograph of a salt marsh riparian or shoreline area. This particular photograph is of the Hollyhock Flats. And the lower right-hand photograph is of a eelgrass meadow at low tide and an underwater shot. Both of these habitats are things that Project Watershed is interested in restoring. Why is the province of British Columbia interested in this? Well, according to a recent article in the Canadian Geographic entitled Habitat Restoration, which is about the Comox estuary and the Project Watershed Blue Carbon pilot project proposed, over 200 of the 442 estuaries in the province have been severely damaged by industry and are prime for restoration. So how do we get this idea to the people that count? How do we present this to our local governments, and how do we move this all forward? Project Watershed established a blue carbon team about 3.5 years ago when we began putting together a research proposal. In October of 2011, a presentation was made at the Comox Valley Regional District Committee of the Whole, and at that presentation, we asked the local governments to go to the province and ask them to make estuaries eligible for carbon offset funding. A resolution was passed unanimously, and local politician Jim Gillis took the same resolution to the Union of British Columbia Municipalities in September of last year, and the resolution was passed. We were able, through our local MLA, to get the executive director of the Climate Action Secretariat in the Comox Valley for a full day in August of last year. Tim Lezouk came in the morning, heard a presentation by the Blue Carbon team, met the Blue Carbon team, had a boat tour of the estuary, got to see eelgrass beds and salt marsh riparian areas, had lunch at which mayors and council members and directors and provincial politicians were there to see the support from our local community, and then spent the afternoon at the Deep Bay Marine Biology Laboratory, a state-of-the-art facility in Deep Bay that Vancouver Island University runs. I think by the end of the day, we had him convinced. I went down and gave talks to the Ministry of the Environment and the Ministry of Education and the Pacific Institute for Carbon Solutions in September. In December, I met with Minister Terry Lake, the Minister of the Environment, and Minister Don McCrae, the Minister of Education. And on April 9th of this year, a memorandum of understanding was signed between Project Watershed, Vancouver Island University, and the Climate Action Secretariat to develop a strategy for habitat restoration and blue carbon protocol in the Comox Valley. Subsequent to that, and this is a photograph of that signing, and subsequent to that signing, a meeting was held on April 30th at the Deep Bay Laboratory where the participants of the Memorandum of Understanding got together. We are developing a strategy. What we need to do, of course, first is to find funding for a 3 to 5 year project. But Project Watershed, in a separate funding issue, will be starting a restoration next week of over 4,000 square meters of eelgrass in the Comox estuary. And associated with that, we'll be making our initial biomass measurements, core sediment measurements, and we'll begin developing a strategy for a protocol for blue carbon offsets. When this protocol has been established, we'll apply it to the Comox estuary, and then it will be taken to one of the other 200 estuaries in the province of British Columbia. So in conclusion, in my opinion, blue carbon is a triple win for the environment. It's a triple win for communities like the Comox Valley. When you restore salt marsh riparian areas and extend that marsh out into the eelgrass, you're adding vegetation and mass. That provides friction, protects the shoreline against wave surges, storm surges, and is a climate adaptation measure. Of course, we know that eelgrass is a wonderful habitat for finfish and shellfish, and salt marsh is also good habitat for fish at high tide and all kinds of other critters. And when you generate a protocol for blue carbon offsets, you're generating new economic opportunities for the province, and you're generating jobs for restorative biologists, a hat trick for the environment, in my opinion. I'll leave you with one thought. This is a wonderful photograph that Dan Bowen, one of our directors, put together. It is on the left, a 1923 air photo taken by the Royal Air Force of the Comox estuary. And Dan used a satellite image of the same elevation and sort of angle 90 years later. So take a look at these and think about it. Thank you very much.